Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The third-person narrator observes Caleb as he sits at the minimalist oak desk in his study. The room is immaculate. Books arranged by spine color. Pens aligned in a perfect row. He is 35. A man who built his life on the principle of control. From his portfolio as a financial analyst to the precise knot of his tie. He leans forward. His reflection. A pale oval on the microphone's metallic mesh. He presses the record button. A small red light blinks to life. The only point of color in the room's stark monochrome. "My name is Caleb Thorne," he begins. His voice, a measured baritone. The kind of voice that exudes calm authority. "I am making this recording for clarity. To document the series of events that led to the end of my marriage." He pauses, letting the silence settle. Our marriage, Chloe's and mine, was, for all intents and purposes, perfect. People said so. We were the couple others looked to. 5 years. Not a single major fight. We had our routines, our shared jokes, our plans for a future that seemed as stable and well-funded as one of my own investment accounts. Chloe, at 32, was vibrant, intelligent. She was the head of communications for a major art gallery downtown. She knew how to shape a narrative. I suppose I should have paid more attention to that particular skill. Caleb shifts in his leather chair. The sound, a soft groan in the quiet room. It started, as these things often do, on a Tuesday. An aggressively normal Tuesday. We were at the kitchen table. The one with the marble top she insisted on buying. The distant hum of a television news report filled the comfortable silence. I remember the smell of the roasted chicken. The way the light from the pendant lamp caught the condensation on my water glass. Everything was in its place. I believed, with the foolish certainty of a man who thinks he knows his wife better than anyone, that we had everything under control. And then, Chloe said it. Caleb's voice remained steady. But the narrator sees his knuckles turn white as his hand rests on the desk. She said it, with the same calm inflection someone might use to discuss the weather. Or a new restaurant she wanted to try. She looked up from her plate. A small piece of bread halfway to her mouth. And said, "On Friday, I'm going out for dinner with a coworker. David." I blinked. A few times. I remember that distinctly. The world didn't stop. But it stuttered. I was waiting for the punchline. For the rest of the sentence. "David, from accounting, he's leaving the company, and a group of us are taking him out," something like that. Some detail that would clarify the absurd, impossible thing I had just heard. But she offered nothing. She just reached for another piece of bread, spread butter on it with a slow, deliberate motion, and went on, as if nothing of consequence had been said. I needed a moment to assemble my thoughts. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe this was some bizarre, terrible joke. To test my sense of humor. But the way she kept her eyes fixed on her plate, refusing to meet my gaze, made a cold feeling creep up my spine. It was the feeling of a carefully planned move. In a game I didn't even know we were playing. "What?" I asked. The narrator notes that his voice, when he recalls it, is a model of restraint. Far calmer than anyone would expect. "What did you say?" Chloe looked up then. And for the first time, I saw something more in her eyes. It wasn't malice. It was something calculated. As if she'd been waiting for exactly this reaction, rehearsing this moment in her mind. "It's just dinner, Caleb. It doesn't change anything between us." Her voice carried a disconcerting lightness. "I love you, and none of this will affect our marriage." I kept my eyes on hers, searching for a crack in that cool facade. But Chloe seemed completely at ease, as though she were utterly convinced this was a normal, healthy thing to propose. My fork lay untouched on my plate. My appetite had vanished. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I wouldn't show it. I would not give her that power. She believed, I think, that I would fall apart. She expected me to explode in anger, to yell, to fire off outraged questions, to give her an ultimatum. That's what a lesser man would do. But I am different. And if there is one thing I know how to do well, it is control my emotions when necessary. He takes a deep breath. Then lets it out slowly. The sound, a faint hiss in the microphone. I had made up my mind. In that instant. If this was a game, I was not going to lose. Then, to her visible surprise, I lifted the corner of my mouth into a slight smile. I see, I said. My tone, almost uninterested. I picked up my glass of water. And took a sip. The narrator observes that as Caleb recounts this, a flicker of that same smile touches his lips again. A ghost of a long-past victory. Chloe's breathing became a little uneven. It was almost imperceptible. But I caught it. And that was enough to confirm my suspicion. She wasn't asking for my permission. She was demanding a reaction. She wanted drama. She wanted me to lose control. So she could feel powerful. The silence between us stretched out. For seconds that felt like hours. She tried to hide her confusion, lowering her gaze to her food. But I continued watching her. With deliberate patience. Well, I continued. My voice now a little too casual. Maybe I should go out with someone, too, you know. Just to see what it's like. That was when Chloe finally looked at me. Properly. Not with the rehearsed serenity from before. But with something new. Uncertainty. Caleb leans back, a triumphant note entering his voice. I couldn't hide my satisfaction. At the small tremor in her hand, as she held her fork. She blinked a few times. As if her mind was struggling to process what I'd said. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected me to call her bluff. Her first mistake, Caleb says, his voice taking on the analytical tone he uses at work when dissecting a failed market strategy, was underestimating me. She assumed my love for her was a weakness she could exploit. She never considered it could be a source of strength, of resolve. He gestures with one hand. As if explaining a complex chart. You've met someone? She asked. She tried to sound indifferent. But the mask was slipping. The question was too quick. Too sharp. I maintained my smile. I shrugged. There's a woman at my spin class. We talk a lot. I think it might be interesting to go out one of these days. A lie, of course. A complete fabrication. There was a woman, technically. Her name might have been Sarah. Or Sophie. I didn't know. I didn't care. She was merely a concept. A strategic countermove. A necessary fiction. That was the moment. I saw her lose a bit of color in her face. The tables had turned. And I hadn't even started playing for real yet. The silence that followed was deafening. Her confident mask slipped. For a split second. And I saw it clearly. The fork she was holding hovered over her plate, motionless. Her eyes, which moments before had been filled with a detached certainty, were now a little wide. Struggling to process the unexpected answer. Caleb leans back in his chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. The narrator notes the posture is one of complete confidence, of a man recounting a battle he has already won. I kept my discreet smile, leaning back. Like this very conversation had no weight for me. But inside, I felt a strange, calculated pleasure at seeing Chloe get a taste of the uncertainty she had just served me. Oh, I see, she murmured, trying to regain her composure. She looked away, fiddling with her food. I noticed the subtle movement of her leg under the table. A slight tremor she was trying to hide. I knew her well enough to recognize the signs of anxiety. So, why did she seem so anxious? All of a sudden. If she truly believed going out with someone else was a normal, progressive step for our marriage, why was she so obviously unsettled when she heard I might do the same? The answer was obvious. She wasn't testing the boundaries of our marriage. She was testing me. And now, that test had backfired on her. Spectacularly. So I pressed my advantage. I kept my tone casual. Is there a problem with that? She forced a short, low laugh. And shook her head. Of course not. I just didn't expect that from you. A critical error. An admission that she had a very specific, weak reaction planned for me in her head. I raised an eyebrow. Funny, I said. crossing my arms. Because I didn't expect this from you, either. This time, Chloe didn't laugh. My words hit their mark. And the forced lightness she'd held onto until then, began to crumble. She tried to recover quickly, lifting her chin and adopting a carefree tone. So, who is she? This woman from the gym. Caleb smirks at the microphone. I knew that question was coming. And what was most interesting was that she wasn't even trying to hide her sudden, desperate interest. Just minutes before, she had thrown out the idea of relationship freedom like it was this modern, open concept, something we could explore without fear. Now, the mere mention of another woman was putting her on the defensive. I'm not sure the details matter all that much, I answered, picking up a napkin, wiping the corners of my mouth. If it doesn't change anything between us, I don't see any reason to talk about it. I was using her own logic against her. It was flawless. End of 2. Chloe let out a short, nasal laugh. But the tension in her expression was obvious. So it's real. You're really going to go out with this woman? I tilted my head slightly, studying her as if I were trying to figure out a puzzle. You're the one who said you wanted us to explore this together, right? She opened her mouth to respond. But nothing came out. For the first time that night, Chloe seemed at a loss for words. The confidence she had when she started this game was evaporating before my eyes. What was supposed to be a way for her to gauge how much power she still had over me was turning into something entirely different. I didn't need anything else at that moment. I already had what I wanted. The certainty that she never expected me to go along with her plan. And more importantly, the certainty that deep down, she knew she was about to lose something she never imagined could slip through her fingers. Without saying another word, I picked up my glass, took the last sip of water, and got up from the table. Good night, Chloe. She stayed there, sitting, watching me leave the kitchen, with a distant, shocked look on her face. And in that instant, I knew the tables hadn't just turned. I was already in control of the game. The days that followed, Caleb continues, his voice flat, were a masterclass in psychological warfare. The house, once full of casual conversations and predictable routines, was now filled with a silence that spoke louder than any words could. The narrator notes a hint of pride in his tone, as he describes his own performance. I went on with my usual activities, showing no sign that I was rattled. I left for work. I came home at the same time as always. But now, I carried myself differently. I seemed lighter. And that's when Chloe began to realize what was really going on. At first, she convinced herself this was just a phase. She thought I was playing around, acting indifferent so she'd back down. Only, I didn't back down. On the contrary, I started behaving even more unpredictably. The first time she felt genuine discomfort was on a Wednesday morning. I remember it clearly. She was having coffee, and I was standing in front of the mirror in the hallway, adjusting my collar. It wasn't the first time I'd done that, but there was something different this time. I looked at myself with more attention. I ran a hand through my hair, checked my appearance twice. Then, I picked up my phone and smiled. A small, private smile. It was a text from my boss about a successful trade. But she didn't need to know that. All she needed to see was the smile. I could feel her watching me. I didn't look at her, but I could feel her gaze. Her heart raced. I'm sure of it. For the first time, she felt something she'd never really felt for her husband before. The fear of losing him. She tried to hide her unease. But the image kept replaying in her mind. Who was texting me? Had I really found someone? That night, while we were on the couch, watching some mindless television show, she made a casual comment. You seem a lot more excited lately. Without taking my eyes off the screen, I just gave a little smirk. Do I? She crossed her legs, trying to sound casual. Yeah, almost like you've been busier. This time, I looked at her. I held her gaze, letting the silence hang in the air. I was weighing the intentions behind her words. Then, with careful calm, I said, yeah. I guess I'm just making better use of my time. The way I said it, the ambiguity. It sent a chill down her spine. I saw it. In the following days, she found herself watching me in ways she never had before. I made sure of it. I would get more messages on my phone, mostly news alerts and emails. But I'd glance at them. And smile. I'd go out for a run earlier than usual. One day, I came home from work and went straight to the shower, humming a tune she didn't recognize. A song I'd heard on the radio on the drive home. Small things. Plausible deniability. Each one, a small cut. Slowly bleeding her confidence dry. The narrator observes that Caleb describes these actions. Not as deceit, but as tactical maneuvers. There's no remorse in his voice. Only the satisfaction of a strategist. Admiring his own cleverness. And then, came the checkmate. On Friday, the same Friday she had planned to go out with her coworker, David I, mentioned casually during breakfast. "I'm going out tonight." Chloe's coffee cup froze. Halfway to her mouth. "Oh. Yeah." She tried to sound unconcerned. "Yeah," I said, buttering my toast. "With that woman from the spin class. Sophie." I gave the fictional woman a name. It made her more real. More threatening. I watched Chloe's face. It was like seeing a building crumble. In slow motion. She felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She opened her mouth to answer. But no words came out. Her mind spun. Trying to find a logical response. A way to steer the situation in another direction. But there was no other direction. I had accepted the rules of the game she herself had started, and now, for the first time, Chloe wasn't sure she was ready to play. Caleb leans forward. His elbows on the desk. His voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. That night. Friday night. That was the culmination of everything. My finest performance. I left the house without hurrying. I chose a shirt she hadn't seen in a while, a dark blue one that she once said made my eyes look brighter. I used a cologne I hadn't worn in years. I wanted every detail to be a question mark in her mind. I didn't offer details about where I was going. I didn't ask where she was going. And above all, I didn't seem the least bit concerned that she supposedly had a date, too. That, I think, is what broke her. The truth hit her like a crushing weight. As I walked out the door, she didn't go out. The coworker, David, sent her messages, I found out later. "Are we still on? Is everything okay?" She didn't reply. How could she? Her mind was far away, completely consumed by thoughts of me. She spent hours pacing around the house, trying to convince herself that none of this mattered. But every minute that passed only made the suffocating feeling inside her grow stronger. She picked up her phone, opening and closing apps for no reason, just looking for a distraction. But deep down, she knew what she was really doing. She was waiting. Waiting for me to send a message. Waiting for me to come home sooner than I said. Waiting for everything to be nothing more than a tease. For me to decide at the last moment that this was all ridiculous. She was waiting for the old Caleb to come back and beg her to stop the game. Caleb pauses. The narrator notes that for the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crosses his face. Before it's replaced by his usual composure. "But I didn't come home early," he continues, his voice hardening again. "I didn't text. I showed no sign of regret. I had to see it through." That was when the real desperation sank in. Here. Caleb's narrative of the evening begins. He speaks of a trendy downtown bar, of witty conversation with the imaginary Sophie. Of feeling alive and free for the first time in years. He paints a picture of liberation. But the third-person narrator sees a different scene, a far less glamorous one. The truth was, Caleb left the house and drove for nearly an hour. With no destination in mind, he ended up in a forgotten part of the city. At a dimly lit dive bar where the smell of stale beer hung heavy in the air. He sat alone, in a corner booth with a glass of whiskey. The amber liquid untouched for most of the evening. He didn't talk to anyone. He just watched the clock on the wall. Its slow, methodical ticking. Marking the time of Chloe's torment. Every 15 minutes, he would pull out his phone. His thumb hovering over her contact photo, before putting it away again. This wasn't freedom. It was a self-imposed exile. A calculated act of psychological torture. He wasn't enjoying himself. He was enduring the minutes, fueling his resolve with imagined scenarios of her panic. When I finally came in, Caleb's voice cuts back into the recording, pulling the focus back to his version of events. It was already past 3 in the morning. I walked in calmly, showing no rush or guilt. I could tell she hadn't expected me to be gone that long. She was on the couch, the TV on some random program, its blue light casting long shadows across the room. She was awake. And in that moment, something inside her broke. How was it? Her voice was weaker than she wanted. Thin and brittle. I took off my jacket, hung it over the back of a chair, and looked at her with the same neutral expression I had maintained for days. It was good. A simple, direct answer. It cut into her. Like a cold blade. I saw panic wash over her face. She wanted to ask questions. Wanted details. Wanted me to say it was a mistake. And that it meant nothing. But she couldn't bring herself to say any of it. I didn't show remorse. I wasn't trying to hide anything. And maybe, that was the worst part of all for her. I crossed the living room and disappeared down the hallway, heading to the bedroom. As if the conversation were over. She stayed where she was. Frozen. Her heart pounding so loudly she could probably hear it in her ears. She had wanted to play a game with me. She had wanted to test me. She had wanted to see me uncertain. But now, she was silently begging for this all to be just a game. Only this time, I wasn't playing anymore. The next morning, Caleb says, his tone now clinical, as if reading a final report. Chloe woke up with a feeling she'd never experienced before, a real, uncontrollable fear. The fear that I wasn't the same man she knew. The fear that this time, she had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. She came into the kitchen. I was already there. Drinking coffee. Scrolling through financial news on my phone. Business as usual. Seeing me so calm, so distant, made her stomach turn. It was like she was looking at a stranger. I didn't say anything when she walked in. I didn't even look up. She cleared her throat. "You got home late," she said, trying to make it sound like a casual observation. "Yeah," I replied simply, not looking up. That nonchalant tone made her even more uneasy. She pulled out a chair and sat down facing me, searching my eyes for some sign that this was still just a game. But I didn't look like I was pretending. I really did seem distant. And that scared her. In a way she never imagined it would. "Caleb," her voice trembled. She hated the vulnerability that slipped out, but she couldn't help it. "What are we doing here?" I finally looked up at her then. I watched her for a few seconds, as if I were deciding if it was worth answering that question. Then, with a calmness that made her skin crawl, I said, "You tell me. After all, this was your idea, wasn't it?" Her stomach dropped. She swallowed hard. "I never thought you'd actually take it seriously." Caleb lets out a short, humorless laugh into the microphone. I laughed then, too, not a laugh of amusement. A laugh of someone who was finally seeing things clearly. "And what did you expect, Chloe? That I'd beg you to change your mind?" She opened her mouth to answer. But I didn't wait. "I've spent the last few days thinking about this. Thinking about what it means. That you would even suggest something like this. Thinking about what it says about us." Her chest tightened. "Caleb. I messed up," she whispered. "Messed up?" I repeated the words, letting them hang. In the painful silence. She wanted to scream that yes, it was all a mistake. That she never should have come up with such a crazy idea. But deep down, she knew it was pointless. I had already made up my mind. Here. Caleb's narrative conveniently glosses over the full extent of Chloe's plea. The narrator, however, sees the memory he is suppressing. Chloe crying. Begging him to talk, apologizing profusely. Saying she was just scared and insecure and handled it in the worst possible way. In Caleb's recording, she is merely a defeated opponent. In reality, she was a broken wife. But the most significant omission is yet to come. I stood up, Caleb says, his voice final. I took my mug to the sink and rinsed it calmly, like I was just finishing my morning routine. Then I turned to her. And with a cold look, I said something that took her breath away. "Thank you, for showing me who you really are." And with that, I walked out of the kitchen, without hesitation. She stayed there. Seated. Paralyzed. A few minutes later, when she finally gathered the courage to walk to our bedroom, she found something on the bedside table. A stack of papers. He pauses. For dramatic effect. The divorce filing. Already signed by me. The narrator observes a crucial detail that Caleb fails to mention. He doesn't tell the microphone that the date on the documents, printed neatly at the bottom of each page by his lawyer's office, was from 3 months prior. He doesn't mention that he had initiated the process long before that fateful Tuesday dinner. Chloe's misguided test wasn't the cause of the divorce. It was merely the convenient, ironclad justification he had been waiting for. To execute a plan he had already set in motion. He wasn't a man reacting to a betrayal. He was a man seizing an opportunity. Her world collapsed. All at once, Caleb states, with an air of detached finality. She wanted to test me. She wanted to see how far I would go. But in the end, she was the one who lost everything. The final recording begins. The narrator notes the change in acoustics. Caleb's voice echoes slightly, betraying the emptiness of the space around him. He is in his new apartment. A place with white walls, and furniture still covered in plastic. It is the sterile environment of a man who has successfully amputated his past. She tried one last time, he says, his voice devoid of emotion. She found me as I was packing my last suitcase. The sound of the zipper echoed in the heavy silence. And she knew this was the end. But driven by desperation, she tried to cling to any last bit of control. "Caleb, please," she said. Her voice was shaky. She forced a smile that was more like a plea. "This went too far. I forgive you for going out with that woman. Let's just forget all of this. If you forget what I said, I'll forget what you did. Let's start over." Caleb scoffs into the microphone. Forgive me, she wanted to forgive me. Even at the very end, she still saw it as a negotiation, a transaction of power. As if her forgiveness was something I needed. I paused for a second, holding the suitcase firmly. I looked at her, and in her eyes, I saw fear. But it wasn't the fear of losing me because of love. It was the fear of losing control. I let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking my head. "I don't need your forgiveness, Chloe. You taught me something valuable these last few days. And now I know I deserve more than this." I closed the suitcase, picked up my keys, and walked out, without looking back. The sound of the lock clicking was the last thing she heard, before the silence became unbearable. He stops talking. For a long moment, the only sound is the low hum of the recording device. He has reached the end of his triumphant story. He has laid out his case, presented his evidence, and proven his justification. He is the victor. "I'm better off now," he says suddenly, as if arguing with an unspoken accusation. "I am. It was the right thing to do. The only thing to do. My life is streamlined, uncomplicated. I have my work, my focus. I'm free." But his words lack conviction. They hang in the empty air of the apartment. He looks around the bare room. At the packed boxes he hasn't had the energy to open for a week. She tried to call, he admits, his voice dropping. "A few times. I blocked her number, of course. Had to. For my own peace of mind. You have to cut ties completely. That's the only way to move on." The narrator sees what Caleb does not say. He sees Caleb, late at night, typing Chloe's name into the search bar of a social media site, only to be met with a private profile. He sees the compulsive, repetitive act of checking, of looking for a sign, a crack in her new life, just as he once looked for a crack in her composure. "I won," Caleb whispers, more to himself than to the microphone. "I played her game. And I won." He reaches out a hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment, before pressing the button. The small red light goes dark. The recording is over. But in the profound silence that follows, a silence unbroken by the hum of a television or the rhythm of another person's breathing, there is no sense of victory. There is only the sound of a single, heavy sigh. The sound of a man, utterly and completely alone, in a room full of echoes. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.